Hello and welcome. This is Working Class to World Class. But before we go any further, I do have a little favour of you. If you could hit that follow or subscribe button, then that would be a massive help. Thank you. In this episode, you'll hear of a young man who unleashed the shackles of the bullies and walked away from his religion. He is now a senior exec in LA and has run a marathon in all 7 continents. Breaking through the barriers of adversity. I'm Lynn Lester, and this is Working Class to World Class. Hey Jeff, welcome to Working Class to World Class. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic, Lynn. Pleasure to be here. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm good. I've just come back from Miami, so if I'm looking a little bit worse for wear, it's completely jet lag.
Well, you look great. Like I love the shininess of your hair. It looks like a shampoo TV commercial.
Well, just because I told you it was a Scottish water, and you're right. So where are you in the world? Where are you right now?
I am based in overcast Santa Monica in Southern California. But you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from here. Originally from Australia, but lived all around the world. But now can be found loving normally sunny California's weather.
Well, do you know what the thing is? I've been to California once, I've been to LA and it was amazing, but it's just so different to the world that I know. So every time I go to a new place, I'm like, oh my God, I get just really, really excited. So I'm very jealous.
Yeah, it's one of those things because I lived in the UK, spent some time in Germany, Melbourne, Sydney, where I'm originally from, and New York, and I normally have it's about a 4 to 5 year window where the first couple of years you kind of see the city for and you're kind of enamored by the city and like any minor problems or anything, you kind of just feel like, oh, it's part of the city. But it's around that 4 to 5 year window when you start really thinking, oh, is this the right place for me or do I really, really love it? But the good news is we're at 5 years now exactly for Santa Monica, and it's just great. It's just you can't get any better than here.
Oh well, sold. I'm going to go back. So, to put this in a bit of perspective, I mean, there's going to be people, like a lot of my guests, people tuning in that know who you are. Some people are like, I have no idea who this Jeff guy is. So, what I want you to do is to sort of lay the land, if you like, and tell people who you are and what you currently do just now.
Sure. So who am I? I'm Jeff, and I have had a kind of varied background and past. I'm not sure if you, I'm the typical person that might appear on your podcasts, but just a little bit about me. So I grew up in a very rough, poor, working class suburb of Sydney. It's not even really Sydney. It's on the extreme outskirts of Sydney. It's about 50 kilometers from the city, from the nice part. And it's certainly not the Australia that I grew up in. It's certainly not the Australia that you think of when you think of Australia. So there's no beaches, there's no palm trees and kangaroos hopping around and from the Tourism Australia commercials. But the area I grew up in was really really rough. It's one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, and it was tough, man. I'm telling you, it was super super tough. I was the growing up in the 80s. I was the only person that looked like me. Like I grew up in a completely homogenous environment, and the school I went to, I just remember like some of the fundamental memories from when I was about 6. That's my son's age now. Is just the kids, their teeth. Uh, they were all black, black and brown. So one of the primary memories, because it's just there was malnutrition, not people not looking after themselves, and it was horrible. My formative years weren't great from the school and from the real narrow-minded viewpoint that I was grown up in. My parents were immigrants from Singapore, and so there was this clash of cultures. There's the working class Australian values, and there's my parents' Singaporean Chinese values, which are all just focused on hard work and study and academia and piano, right? And I felt like I wasn't good enough. I wasn't living up to expectations anymore. But then on the school side, I also felt like I was an outcast. Overlaid on top of that, there's a third element, which was the religion that my family and then later on the school I went to in high school was focused on, was like a fundamentalist religion. And I just felt, again, never good enough. And it wasn't until the age of 17 where my high school days were just not great at all. And I just felt like I didn't have any control. I didn't have any say in what I was going to do or the type of person I could be because of these three clashing forces, like the working class Australian values, the religion, and then my parents' values. But it wasn't until the age of 17 that I just realized that, hey, screw this, man. Like I've got to get out. One, I've got to get out of here, and two, I could be whoever the damn hell I wanted to be. I didn't have to go down a certain path career wise like my parents wanted me to. I didn't have to go down a certain moral path that the religion I subscribed to wanted me to go down. And so, yeah, I went to university, went to college, graduated, and then just tried to get as far away as possible and ended up in Europe. So, yeah, so that's the fundamental first couple of decades of where I came from.
Wow. And now, like, just to sort of set the scene, so to tell everybody the organization you work for now.
Yeah, so very, very different from the area I grew up in. I work for Microsoft. I've got a dream role. I work in the CEO co-innovation team, and we're a small group of consultants that are driving change and driving strategic enterprise value for our biggest customers and co-innovating together. And it's just been fantastic.
Yeah.
But I took quite a different path to get there to work at a big tech company. I spent nearly 20 years in the advertising industry, and as I mentioned, worked in some of those cities that I mentioned, and for some of the biggest global ad agencies.
Wow. So, I mean, if you just picture the scene, for people listening in and watching this,
Yeah,
you come from what you've described as one of the poorest, if not the poorest area in Australia, to working for one of the biggest tech giants in the world. I mean, just even think about that for a minute. That's pretty awesome. And so, what I would love to do is to go back, and this is what I tend to do with my guests, is go back to the beginning, sort of the things that you were talking about. I want to really delve into that a bit more, understand the Jeff and how he lived his life as a kid. But what was the name of that place then in Australia?
it's called Macquarie Fields.
Okay.
Macquarie Fields. It's about, like as I mentioned, it's about 50 kilometers southwest of the Central Business District in Sydney.
Okay. And you were saying it was, you're sort of like narrow-minded. So describe it like for anyone that's not been there, how would you sort of sum it up or how can people picture it?
Yeah, so the house I lived in, we were in a cul-de-sac. And I remember the three houses that were surrounding us, right? So the backyard house and the two houses on either side. All of them were housing commission, which are like public housing projects. And there was a house in our that backed onto our backyard, and they had a dog. And but I never saw this dog, like literally never saw it the entire time I lived there because the grass in our neighbor's backyard was so long. It was taller than me. And the only time that I knew that the dog was moving around was because the grass would sort of part around, but it was just full of trash and full of weeds and full of grass. So these were all three-bedroom suburban brick houses, and it was just a kind of sea of sea of sameness. So that's I think the area may have changed and evolved a little bit since then. But yeah, like I mentioned, I had to get out of there. And over the decades, there was some upward mobility. My parents, when we were in high school, we moved a few kilometers closer to the city. It was still another very working class neighborhood. Things looked a little bit different, but like I said, the suburbia of working class Sydney is a little bit different to what you might imagine from the images that people have of Australia.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely different to the postcards, put it that way. And what
Absolutely.
I find is really interesting, and I guess it's not a slate on people who are working class because you only know what you know.
Yeah.
Is you talk about the grass and the trash, and I think when sometimes you don't really have a lot, you almost you don't almost respect your area because it's almost like it's a bit like throwing a stone at a glass window. If it's like that anyway, you don't even notice it after a while because it's just how you live. And it sounds to me as if it sort of fell into that sort of pattern. People just accepted they didn't have much, and that's just the life that they had.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember in the high school I went to, there was a lot of very narrow-minded views, and the religion. I went to a religious school in high school, And the religious school, basically, the underlying message was you don't want to be too ambitious. You don't want to work too hard. You don't want to be greedy because everything will be provided. And I took exception to that. And I found that I thought, well, hang on, you only get this one chance. I didn't believe in an afterlife. I didn't believe in anything except for what we have now. And I still believe that. And so the message that I had always told myself since then was no, you get this life. You basically make it a good one. Don't sit back and expect everything to be handed to you because everything will be provided, because that's the opposite of ambition and progress. And if I look back, there are a lot of people that I did grow up with who took the message literally that the school and the religion had told them, and they're still there, and that's okay. That's fine if they're happy, but I don't. It's every now and again I come across some of the folks, and I don't really get that sense of achievement or fulfillment or even a purpose. And I fundamentally believe it's from the formative years that we all had and the messages that we have been told. Because kids might, like I mentioned, my son Hudson, he's only 6, he's about to turn 7. Their brains are just absorbing everything at the moment. And over the next 10 years, I want to make sure that my job as a parent is to teach him just this one thing. I just want to teach him that he could be whoever he wants. Just there's this limitless possibility that's in front of him, despite all the negativity and a lot of doom and gloom scenarios that are out there in the media and social media. But the world actually is pretty damn awesome. You just have to have that right mindset. So that's what I'm trying to teach him.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's definitely got a good mentor in you. And I think, one of the things that you were saying there is, the whole, whole religious thing and the school and the way that the schools talk to you and make you feel like you're a service person. You just grow up to serve other people, and it's quite a blinkered future. And what I quite find interesting about that is, from a young age, you're technically being brainwashed, really, and mold, whether it be religion or school. So it does take a point, and it was good that you were saying that you then broke away from that and thought, nah, stuff this, I'm going to change that. But I guess before that even happened, before you had that sort of moment, let's go back and sort of look at school then. So you were saying you didn't quite fit. What does that mean?
Well, kids are notoriously tribalist, um, to a huge degree, and I was the only person that looked like me. That's as simple as that. I sounded like everyone else. I had an Australian accent, I still do, but I got taunted every single day. I got made to feel unwelcome every single day. I got told directly to my face pretty much every day, go back to China. And the irony is, I'm not Chinese. My parents are from Singapore, and I was born in the same city that they were born in. And as a child, those formative years, all you want is to be accepted. All you want is to have your tribe around you. But I was reminded every single day that I didn't belong. And here's the whole irony, Lynn. It took me decades to realize that when the kids were saying to me, you don't belong here, they were right, because I didn't belong there. I shouldn't have been there. The narrow-mindedness and the backwards thinking, that didn't sit with me, and so that's why I moved away as soon as I could. I've lived in Australia in a different area. Came back for a number of years and then decided I wanted to move to the US. But anyway, that took me a long time to realize that the kids were right, because I didn't belong there because of the attitudes and the mindset.
Yeah. You didn't feel you belonged there because you decided your mentality was much more mature than what they were at the time. And, one of the things you were saying there about the, not feeling welcome. I mean, I got bullied at school for, oh God, from about the age of 6 years old up until about 12. So for 6 years of my childhood, I was called names every single day of life, where you I don't know about you, but for me, I kind of lived a sort of non-existence where part of me was like, well, I'm not going to let you get the better of me. I'm going to keep smiling, although I was crying and tearing up inside. But I mean, how did you feel as a kid? Like, that child in the playground, these people are just disgusting. What's going through the mind of a kid, like for you?
Oh, horrible things like self-loathing, basically self-hatred, hatred of my background and ethnicity. So yeah, I understand what you meant. Like you pretend that the words don't hurt you, and then there's the whole thing. Oh, sticks and stones don't break my bones, right? Sticks and stones break my bones. That's all. But the words do hurt because again, as a kid, all you want is acceptance, and I just was not getting that. And it wasn't until university and then moving to Europe that I found my tribe with like-minded people. I play music and I joined a band and I made some friends, some really, really good friends still to this day. And I found acceptance in who I could basically be myself. I didn't have to put on a front. I didn't have to pretend that I was a surfer dude at high school just to fit in. I could be whoever I wanted to be, and that is a really, really liberating feeling. I feel that a lot of adults, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and beyond, still have not been liberated from that thinking. I think a lot of people, and I live in Santa Monica and I can see tons and tons of people, even still to this day, trying to be someone they're not, trying to project a certain image that isn't authentic to them. I live in a quite a nice area, but deliberately don't drive a nice car. Just drive a humble little Honda. I'm the only one in the school parking lot that's a Honda, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of people who I don't want to necessarily live that particular image because I just want to be who I am.
Yeah, exactly. And you've proven that time and time again through your career, being who you are as a person. And as you say, it's not that you can't have that fancy car. You choose not to have that fancy car. And I think that's fantastic. There's so many people I know that as soon as they break away from being working class, they just want everything and actually sometimes put themselves into danger where they can't really afford it. And they just live that exuberant life. And so one of the things that I'm really keen to explore is, so you talk about school, and I know I can tell even from speaking to you how tough that is, and I get it because I've been there and I know it and I've lived through it myself, where to the point where I would, I'd nip my skin and I'd bruise my arms and I'd punch myself and I was really tortured myself because it was just, it's so hideous unless you've experienced it. I don't think people can truly understand it. So obviously you went through that. And then, you were talking about your parents and religion. Was there for a moment, now remember, we're talking through the eyes of a child, not an adult. So, through the eyes of a child, did you ever resent your parents for living in that country in Australia because of the way you were being treated in school, or did you accept the fact that your mum and dad came here or came? I say here as if I'm in Australia, but went there? Yeah, what was your kind of feeling towards them with how you were being treated in school?
Great question. I never resented them for living in that area, for migrating from Singapore to Australia and then going to that area. That area was the only place that they could afford. They were working class. I did resent them for some of the mannerisms and some of the cultural nuances and mannerisms. Now, as an adult, I can, of course, it's a different. I know what it's like to live in a different culture, but at the time as a kid, you just don't appreciate that. But I was glad then, and I'm glad now that I am from Australia. Like I wouldn't imagine or wish anything else.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the context of this story at this moment is always through the lens of a child. So you're
Yeah.
absolutely right. It's not how you feel as an adult, it's just through like a 6-year-old kid or whatever. And you were talking about the religion side of things. So, I mean, I'm not religious at all. I've never been brought up in religion. So I actually don't really understand that culture, what it's like. But what is it like? Like, explain to me what is a day in the life of someone who has got a religious family. What does that look like?
So I always liken it to the George Orwell book 1984, where there's Big Brother, and Big Brother's always watching. Okay. But here, the Big Brother is inside your head, so it's not external surveillance watching you via cameras. It's yourself watching you, and it was a prison. It was a prison of your mind. So we were taught very clearly that every single every single misdemeanor, right, from having sexual thoughts all the way through to murder, is all equal. So if I looked at a girl at school, instantly I'd feel huge guilt because I was essentially at the same level of misdemeanor as a murderer. And so having that weight every minute of every single day of I'm worthless, I'm not good enough, I did it again, I'm a horrible human being. That type of crushing of a kid's spirit by your own self, by your own brain, by your own rational brain, just chastising you, right? Then there was always the pretending you're someone else, pretending you're holier, pretending you're better than everybody else as a religious fundamentalist. That was exhausting because you've got the external perception of what you're trying to portray, but then you've also got the inner feelings of just rot inside you because you feel like you're worthless every single minute. It's just a horrible, horrible way to live it. It's a horrible thing for a child to go through. Let's put it that way.
It makes a double whammy, isn't it? Because you've got this going on in school, you're being tormented in school, and then you've got the religious internal thoughts. And so, like, I mean, I'm surprised that people can actually survive that because that's like yeah, I can't even call. I mean, doing the school thing was bad enough. When I went home, I had a loving family and we were very free. We weren't religious at all. I don't even like. I got confused of what even Jesus and God and I don't really. I mean, we're just so not religious. It's only what I ever heard on TV at Easter, for example. And so, but to have that constant, not even yin and yang, just that constant pull and take, it just must be. I don't know. It just must scramble the brain.
It does. There was that moral guilt, that weight, the feeling of unacceptance through my peers, and then my parents had very, very high expectations for me, almost like a classical cliche type of parents. And uh, I, I felt that I was never good enough, that I wasn't achieving enough, that there was always withholding of celebration or praise or accomplishment through the belief that oh, if you encourage or if you say well done, then I won't try anymore. And I love my parents, and I feel that they did the best that they could under the circumstances. There was myself, and I had past tense an older sister, Jo. She was 7 years older than me, and she unfortunately passed away when I was in my 20s. But she was hands down the greatest influence and just this bright, shining, radiant joy and light in my life. That was the only thing. I only had her. And she was 7 years older and she went through exactly the same thing. Like every single thing she went through as well. She was made to feel as an outcast as well. But she processed it in a really great way. And when she was in her early 20s and I was still at school, she she traveled, she went to Europe and she did the backpacking thing and she just basically chose her own path and she'd always say to me, Jeff, look, these these idiots around you, they're making you feel horrible, but the problem's with them, problem's not you. You can do whatever you want. Just get through school and you can just go and live the life that you want. And so she taught me that there was something else besides this existence which was trapping me.
And so when you were younger, I mean, your sister, I mean, she does sound that she was amazing because I think from what you're saying, she was the kind of only sanity, I guess, that you had at certain points, the critical points in your life. And so when she went traveling, did that mean that you were left at home on your own? And if so, how did that feel? The fact that this person, this number one person in your life, is now fled the nest.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. I was happy for
Yeah.
her. that she had gotten out, but at the same time, um, yeah, it was tough. But we spoke every second day, and even then, when I did move to Europe and she was back in Sydney, we spoke all the time. And she was such a positive influence, and still is a positive influence in my life. It's just a shame that my wife and my son just would never have a chance to meet her.
Yeah. Do you know, I kind of feel that as well. So when I was younger, my brother, my mum, and my dad passed. So my partner and my son have never met them. So Lewis knows his gran and grandpa through all the stories. So their spirit is absolutely still alive through me. And you know what you were saying about your sister going away, although she was absent physically, I actually think probably that motivation of phoning you, telling you what she was maybe doing, what the world was like, seeing it through a different kind of virtual imaginary lens. I guess was that the kind of thing that do you think really sort of sparked your ambition and drove you?
It was definitely a part of that. I think
Yeah.
she was and still is a huge influence. Like my parents were and still are a huge influence, like pushing me to always do more and want more. And ambition and motivation is a good thing. It's almost 100% a good thing because I am driven. I'm driven in work, I'm driven in academia, and I'm driven in relationships, and driven in just experiences. But then also driven in running and sport. Um, but at the same time, I have done and achieved a lot and seen some incredible things that most people have not. But I also need to know when to stop and when to celebrate and when to say, hey, this is pretty good. I could probably slow it down a little bit. And I don't think I have that off switch, which I'm very self-aware of at the moment.
Well, before we come to all these amazing things, and I've got a bit of an insight, and people will in a second as well, what you've achieved. So you know that you were saying at school, obviously, so you know you didn't fit in, or to them you didn't fit in, their problem, and you had the religious thing, and you had all that going on. What was life like in terms of like getting stuff? Like, did you go on holidays? Did you have nice things, or was that also quite an underprivileged existence as well?
My parents were frugal because they didn't earn much money, but they
Yeah.
worked. My dad I remember him working 70 hours a week. He worked at the airport. He was a technician, and he would just keep putting in overtime every single day because he wanted to, as the classic immigrant story, come to a richer country with not much and just wanting to work hard and build a better life and have the next generation, so my generation, our generation, just keep social progress. And it was the immigrant story for him and my parents was a success. They did. They came, they worked hard, but they were incredibly frugal, just saving every single cent. And so, did we have nice things? We had what we needed to live in existence. Did we go on fancy holidays? Not really. No. Did we have a fancy car? Not really. I was taught to work hard, to be frugal myself, and just to keep striving for more. So that, as I mentioned, that ambition and that immigrant story was very well successful in terms of the values that they imparted on myself and the system.
Absolutely. And what I'm starting to see quite clearly now is the foundation's been laid actually for your success. As ironic as it may sound. So, you know, it's the hard work, it's the hustle, it's the understanding what you need to survive. You don't need extravagance. You can have it if you want, but you don't need it fundamentally to live. And, so, and it's also about coping with individuals because whilst you had all this going on in the playground, I am getting a very good sense that you kind of knew how to deal with it as hard as that may have been. So all these things, I guess, then led you into the sort of next part of your life. So you were talking about there's a certain age where you decided, I think you said 17, if I picked that up right, you decided that was it. You were out. What does out mean? Like what did you do? And you know, talk me through that. You know, how did you, as a guest, sort of tell your family you were moving on?
Yeah, that realization actually came to a very dramatic climax. It was October 1998. I was in grade 11, 17, and the bullying that the school allowed, because I'm sure the school would be aware of this, like there were tons and tons of signs, but the bullying had reached a climax where I was just, no, I can't do this anymore. Like I, you're talking about self harm. Well, that thoughts were definitely going that way, and I just and I prayed. And you're not allowed to test the religion. That's part of the rule number one about the religion is you're not allowed to question the religion, which is kind of like Fight Club, right? But I said, no, screw this. I have to. Like I've come to a point where things aren't going to be great. So I tested. I said, look, this I prayed and I said, this has to stop in 7 days. The bullying has to stop in 7 days. Why seven? Well, just felt very symbolic. I didn't know. I could have said I wanted to stop straight away, but I was a bit scared. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. And so that was the test. I thought if in 7 days the bullying stops, my life is great. But if in 7 days the bullying does not stop, well, I'm walking away from the religion and I'm also going to just walk away from the entire prison of a mental existence which I had in my life with everything. And so day one came and went, nothing happened. Day two came and went, nothing happened. Day three, day four, day five, if anything, it got worse. And I was actually quite scared because I didn't know what I was going to do. Day six came along, day seven came along. In the morning of day seven, I thought, well, this is it. My life's going to dramatically change at the end of today and then going into tomorrow and the rest of my life. When the week was up and nothing had changed, that day I felt that a sense of relief. Not because I thought that it had failed. That, well, I'm still going to be bullied now. But it was also relief in the sense that I could stop caring. I could stop worrying about, because I had one more year of school and then that was it. I was going to leave this area. And I'd made that plan that, all right, there is no religion that's out of my life now. That wasn't bringing me joy and fulfillment and happiness. It didn't work. And it took me a long time to realize this, years, that I was asking for something to stop. But really, I was narrow-minded in my thinking. I was asking something to stop so that my life would be better. But really, what I was actually trying to do was give myself agency and power and self-control to be the person I wanted. I thought my life would be better if bullying stopped, but what I ended up getting was something much, much greater and more powerful than just bullying stopping. What I was able to get through this 1 week action and this test was just the belief that I could be whoever I wanted, which I think is something much, much, much more powerful.
Yeah, you almost gave yourself the permission, didn't you? You gave yourself the
Yeah.
permission to make your peace with the fact you had to move on. And I think that actually relinquishing sort of that power away from those people to you, I guess, was powerful in its own right. And probably, I imagine, a big relief off your shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. It was cliched, life changing, and transformative, but that 1 week pretty much was.
Okay, so what then happened next? So this, you gave it the 1 week time limit, nothing changed, and you decide, okay, great, it's not going to change, so I'm going to do something about it myself. What did you do?
Walked away from it completely. I went to university in Sydney, studied engineering. That was the last thing I probably did that my parents wanted me to do. They were pushing me in that direction. I wasn't good enough to be a doctor or a lawyer, so I already felt like I was failing there. Engineer is the next best thing. Again, not even thinking about what I just wanted, just trying to make someone else happy. So I did that, and I didn't like it, and I struggled through it, and then left engineering school, moved over to the UK, had two suitcases. That was it, and my guitar. That was all I had. Sold my car, didn't really have much money, and just got to the UK and just hustled and hustled. And I had a whole variety of jobs. I was a was a dodgy salesman for my first year, and I was just selling anything, right? And then like telesales, telemarketing, and just and that was great. That learned how to communicate properly, and then fell into the advertising industry. And I was in the advertising industry for the next 17 years after that, working for all these big, big big global ad agencies. And my life over throughout my 20s and through my 30s, and I moved back to Sydney, then Melbourne, then New York, and now California. But it was I still, even though I'd shed tons and tons of the old limiting beliefs, I call them inherited limiting beliefs. I'd shed most of them, almost all of them, right? But there was one limiting belief that I still couldn't shake. It was when the PE teachers and the kids at school would say, "Jeff, you're not athletic." I believed it because I wasn't. I was skinny. I still am skinny. I had no coordination. I don't now at all. The only sports that mattered in Australia are cricket and rugby league, and I couldn't bat and couldn't kick. I couldn't throw. And so I just thought, oh well, I guess I'm just not athletic. I'm just going to resign myself to a life of not being athletic. But it wasn't until I was 32 years old, and it was 10 years ago, and I was in my final year of business school. I went back to business school. I did my MBA in Australia, and I was in a pub in Melbourne, Australia, and I wasn't healthy. Right, I had a great life. I was good career, good friends, good relationships, and but I just wasn't healthy. I just was drinking far too much, as Aussies do. And a mate of mine, Alex, he said to me, "Hey Jeff." At the pub, 1 a.m. Nothing ever good happens after 1 a.m. except for this moment. He goes, "Hey, Jeff, why don't you run the Melbourne Marathon with me in 10 months?" And I looked at him and 4 pints in, and I said to him, "All right, I can't run." And he goes, "Yeah, you can." By the way, I'd never run more than 3 miles in my life. And and he said, "Yeah, you can. Of course you can run. Anyone can run, and anyone can run a marathon. All you have to do is train. And the marathon is in 10 months. And if we train together and you do the right nutrition and training and hydration, we'll run it together. It's a great way to relieve stress over this final year." So the next day I sobered up, and I thought it was still a great idea. And I immediately signed up to the Melbourne Marathon. And I called him and I said, "Mate, I signed up. Let's start training." And we did that. Following weekend, we went on our first training run. And then he dropped out. Uh, for good reason. He reminds me all the time. It's for good reason. Every time I tell this story. But I was like, well, even though Alex has dropped out, I still am going to run this Melbourne Marathon because I've signed up for it. I've already paid. I bought myself a pair of fancy Nike trainers, and I'm going to run. And I did. I trained throughout that year. I had some injuries. I had a major relationship breakup. I decided I was going to move to New York, but there was some ups and downs throughout that final year that I was in Australia. And I did. I trained, and I successfully ran my first marathon in just over 10 years ago. And it was fantastic. I loved it. I was hooked. The following year, in 2014, I uh, I happened to be in Colombia in South America. I was in a relationship, and she was from Colombia, and then I happened to notice that one of the trips we were going there, that the Medellin marathon was on. And I thought, well, I've been running consistently, so I may as well sign up and do that. So I ran, and I did, and I didn't do that great. I had probably overconfident, but I ran the Medellin marathon in 2014. And then I thought, well, I've run now two marathons on two continents. So I did some searching, and I thought, well, I wonder if anyone has run a marathon on all seven continents. And it turned out, yeah, there was a thing. It's called the Seven Continents Marathon Club. And at the time, 60 people had done it. And I thought, well, all right, that's a nice stretch goal. Well, I'm going to run a marathon on all seven continents now. I just declared it on social media. So it was public, and I had to be accountable now. And I thought, right, if I can run a marathon on all seven continents, I'll do the grand finale in Antarctica by the time I'm 40. And that was my next 7 years planned out. And that's what I did. Every year, year after year, I ran in New York City. I ran in Tokyo. I ran in South Africa. I ran, it's called the Big Five Safari Marathon, where you're running in a field and there's animals and uh, giraffes and hippopotamuses, and there was lions around as well. And it was just incredible. I just ticked off all of these continents, Copenhagen in Europe, and then the grand finale was in Union Glacier. It's called the Antarctic Ice Marathon. It's a few hundred miles from the South Pole, and it was it was incredible. Like just getting to the starting line was a marathon in itself. There was a You have to fly from the bottom tip of Chile, Punta Arenas, to get to a chartered jet to land on the ice. But there was a diplomatic snafu between Chile and Australia, and I actually got deported from Chile all the way back to America because there were some new regulations which had just come in. This was just coming straight out of COVID, and so it was extremely stressful. But I ended up at Union Glacier at the starting line. This was December 2021, and the conditions were just understandably pretty brutal. You're looking at -15 to -25 Celsius, so that's about -5 Fahrenheit. You're running on a glacier, glacial ice that's over 10,000 years old. Blue sky, imagine running on pure white ice. Imagine white mountains all around you because it's you're surrounded by the Ellsworth Mountains. Incredible weather that day. It was blue sky, but the weather in Antarctica is notoriously unpredictable, like storms happening all the time, wind conditions changing all the time. There was a huge dump of snow just before we got there, which was unseasonable because Antarctica is a desert. It's the driest continent on Earth, and so we're running on 2 inches of powder. And it was just spectacular. It was just magical. It was tough. 42.2 kilometers, 26 miles, which is a marathon. Uh, I felt on top of the world. I felt alive, extremely tired because the conditions really are brutal when they take it out of you. But at the end, on my final lap, because there's four laps of 10.5K, my final lap, I just started tearing up because I thought, well, this is it. I've now achieved this goal, right? Or about to achieve this goal, and like it was almost like a grand symbolism for me of just overcoming um, challenges and barriers and obstacles throughout my life. And so for me, that was a really symbolic moment. As I was crossing the line, I picked up an Australian flag that was set up and had tears coming out, which kind of went very cold and then started freezing. And it was just the most remarkable experience.
Wow, wow, wow. I mean, that is just some story, isn't it? And it's a true story as well. So, I mean, honestly, Jeff, I can't even, I'm now going to sound like you. I can't run the length myself, and I don't actually, and I don't enjoy running. So I remember once, and this will make you laugh. I remember when I was 19 years old, my father had passed away, and my nephew David had said to me, Lynn, do you want to do the Glasgow Half Marathon? And again, like you, I was like, yeah, yeah," but because of the reason we were doing it, I was like, yeah, of course I'll do it. But however, I wasn't as smart as you, and I didn't train. And so I think before it, I just did like a half hour on a treadmill. I mean, literally, it was so pathetic. And I remember doing this half marathon, and it got to a point where my nephew's like, do you mind if I run ahead just so that I can get a kind of reasonable time? And I ended up running with this man in his 90s who was
Oh,
like, come on, you can do it, you can do it.
well.
I couldn't walk for a week, and I've never done a marathon since. So hats off to you. Oh God, can you imagine? I was like a wee old woman. And one of the things that that you sort of said at the beginning of that story was there was one thing that you couldn't shake as a kid, and that's what you weren't athletic, you weren't sporty, and all the kids kind of had the upper hand, if you like. So see when you completed that, whilst you completed it for you, so it was all for you, it was you to prove that you could do it. Did you have truthfully in your head a thought of like two's up to all of you, or did that not cross your mind?
To be truthfully honest, Lynn, it didn't cross my mind.
Yeah,
I was
good.
doing this. I was doing this for me.
Hmm.
I wasn't to. It wasn't. It was definitely. I wasn't thinking about the kids at school at all. Like, besides, the occasional time I talk about my stories, I don't really think about it. Even my childhood. Although, you know, when you see, you post achievements on social media or you tell people about it, colleagues or friends, yeah, of course, I'm a human being, so the nice positive comments can be very, very flattering. But essentially, I was doing this just to prove that I could prove to myself that I could do it.
Good for you. And now you are doing, I believe, that is it ultra marathons?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So after I finished this achievement, there's less at the time. There was about 350 people who had done it. So the numbers had increased. I mentioned there was only 60 when I first started. Uh, so I joined the Seven Continents Marathon Club, and I was interviewed by Runner's World about a year ago, and they did a big profile on me. And the interviewer, Liz, she said to me right at the very end, she said, "So what now, Jeff? You've conquered a marathon on all seven continents. You've overcome all these barriers and obstacles. What are you going to do now?" And I said to her, "I'm going to run an ultra marathon on every continent." She said, "Serious?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" So an ultra marathon is technically anything that's longer than a marathon, but the minimum socially acceptable distance for an ultra marathon is 50 kilometers. So it's a bit longer. So that's 32 miles. But yeah, I've been doing longer ones than that. So last year, in December, I ran a 106K ultra, which is 66 miles. That was in Mount Kosciuszko in Australia, in the Snowy Mountains. That was brutal. That was very, very brutal. Far harder than running a marathon in Antarctica. That was took 20 and a half hours running through pitch blackness with a headlamp by myself in the wilderness, up and down, huge elevation. You run up to the top of Mount Kosciuszko, our highest mountain, and down, and then all through up and down other little mountains around there. 3 thunderstorms. There was mud. The lightning was just incredible, just lighting up the entire sky, like sloping all the way down. Like there were hidden rocks, hidden tree roots. That was next several levels harder. And now I'm training for an ultra marathon in Mont Blanc in the Swiss Alps. That's in August, and then we'll just take it from there. See where it
See
takes
what
me.
happens. See
Yeah,
what happens. What goes through your head? Because obviously I was telling you how pathetic I am and I can't do these things. But not because I can't, that's not true. I don't want to. Because if I really wanted to, I'm sure I
you would.
could build it. But I've chosen not to. But what goes through in your head then? So you're running and you're freezing and you're exhausted. And how do these people and how do you keep going? Like what is it that triggers you?
So your mind is so powerful, right? So at the end of this 106K, I had no idea. It was double the distance I'd ever done before, and so I thought, well, one, am I able to do it? And you're constantly doubting yourself. Like you have imposter syndrome and self doubt, even the minute before you get to the starting line. That is a real thing, and you got to try and overcome that. But two, I wanted to feel what it will be like to get to exhaustion, to complete exhaustion. And I thought, well, maybe 100K will be exhaustion, maybe not. And it wasn't because I could still keep going if I needed to. I felt probably by the end of it, I felt maybe a 3 out of 10. Like if 10 out of 10 is jumping out of bed and 0 out of 10 is cannot walk another step. I was about a 3 out of 10. It wasn't great. It was pretty painful and pretty sore and tired, of course, after running for that long. Burnt 8,000 calories. But, I could have still done more. So, because I think the human mind, and I'm just fascinated by it, is so, so powerful. Like we have reserves in our body that we don't give ourselves credit for. David Goggins, the athlete and author and influencer, he calls it the 40% rule. There's no science behind it, but basically says when you think you're absolutely at exhaustion, you still got another 40%. But again, there's no science behind it, but there have been a lot of studies, which I did some research on, which shows that it's true. People when they think they're completely at exhaustion, like through in the lab, they still have tons more they can actually do. There are tons more. So but to answer your question, what's going through my head? Sometimes not a lot. It's very meditative in the sense that you block out everything else around you. You block out worries about your life or work or anything like that, and you focus on just getting that next step and focus on getting to the next checkpoint. That's what's going through my head.
Wow, what an incredible story. I mean, the closest I've kind of got to that is I used to do martial arts. I used to karate as a kid,
Yeah.
and I did it for about 3 decades. And I remember, like, the minute I tied my black belt, I was in a very different zone. So I was me, and then, but the minute I put the gi on, I tied the belt, I almost became someone else. I was still me, but mentally I wasn't me. And so I do understand how there's just a trigger that puts you into the sort of meditation zone, and you will not fail.
Yeah, exactly. And the more races you do, the more training you do, the more self efficacy and confidence increases. And I went for a run just before this, a few hours ago. I went out into the mountains, the Santa Monica Mountains, and ran 8 miles and going up to the top of Mount San Vicente. And there's just something spectacular. Like when you're in the wilderness, you're by yourself, there's no one around you. It's early morning, the sun's rising, and it's something just magical and, dare I say it, therapeutic and addictive about just running on the trails, running in the mountains, being by yourself. It's spectacular. I recommend it to anybody.
Okay, I may have to give it a go. Before this, I checked my steps. That's very different to my miles.
It's so good.
One of the things I didn't ask you actually, and I'd be intrigued before we sort of wrap up in this, is when you get into advertising. So you were saying obviously you came to Europe and you were sort of talking about your journey, and you said, "Oh, I got into advertising." How did you get into it? Is it someone that you met? Did you apply for a post? What happened?
Right. So when I was studying engineering, there were a couple of coding subjects that I did, like programming, and I loved it. That was the only part of my degree that I loved. All the everything else, the math, the physics, everything I just struggled with, but the coding I loved, and that just somehow clicked. And so when I was in London, I saw a job for a search engine optimization uh, expert, and I'd been playing around with building websites and doing my own SEO to it. And so I applied for this job at this agency, and I got the job, and it was great. And for 2 years, this was a digital marketing agency, and I was the SEO guy. But I also would help build the web pages as well and optimize them, and then help kind of develop them. Even though there were developers as well, it was a very small company. And so through that, I did that for a couple of years, and through that, I then got a job also in search marketing at Isobar, which was part of Aegis Media, which then got acquired by Dentsu. And so then I became part of the Dentsu network, and I was at Dentsu for 14 years, I believe. So quite a while. Yeah.
What an amazing story again. I mean, I keep saying that, an amazing story because I am literally wowed by this. You come over, you don't know anybody, and obviously you've met friends along the way, but it's just remarkable of what you've achieved now. And one thing I have to ask, because I don't know, I'm a bit frightened of the answer because I don't know what you're going to say. Are your parents, or did they ever give you a sense that they were proud, or were they still quite modest with pushing you? Like, how did that balance work?
It's a tough one. In Asian culture, there is a there is a distance between parent and child. So my wife is Italian Australian, and she'll say something like, "Oh, I'm best friends with my mum." Like she'll say that, and I will. The first time I heard her say that, I thought, "Oh wow, that's amazing. That's so great. She's so close with her mum." But in Asian Chinese culture, that just doesn't exist. Like if and when I talk, I've got a few Asian friends, and when I talk to them, and I'll ask, "So, what's your relationship like with your parents?" They'll say something very similar, which I will say to you, which is there's that hierarchical distance. There's a level of love, of course, and respect, but you would never say that you're best friends with your parents. And there's stoicism is big, and you don't share emotion often. You don't necessarily say I'm well done or I'm proud. My dad has evolved a lot, which is fantastic, and so he does say well done and proud, and my mum to a degree as well. But it's different to a and it's difficult to understand. But yeah, anyway, so there's always that. But I have a ton of love and respect for my parents, of course.
Yeah, and I'm sure even if they don't say it in abundance, I'm sure they absolutely think it. They just have
Yeah.
to keep you in your place so that you just keep trying and you don't ever give up. But one person I imagine it would be utterly proud is your sister, from what you've told me. I mean, that must sort of live with you. I guess you kind of go through life and think, she'd be happy right now.
Yeah, I should probably try and think about that a lot more. But yeah, I think you're right. She would be.
Yeah, well, for the moment, although you were saying, you need to stop and you need to, appreciate whether it be the small things or the big things and celebrate. I think right now we can agree that you are absolutely a celebration in terms of everything that you've achieved, and I'm really, really pleased that you've been willing to, and also you've been able to really talk about this because I know it's not been easy from lots of different angles. But thank you for sharing it with the world, and hopefully together we're going to inspire a lot more people.
Thanks so much, Lena. I really appreciate the chat.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you.